I needed something that fed my own soul too, and that's music. And that's always why I've gone to music, because there's just things you can express musically that I can't any other way.
What fuels a multi-passionate life? I'm Jessica Wan, and in this podcast, I interview people who straddle two completely different worlds. I call them ampersands, and we are collectively designing the Ampersand Manifesto. I'm excited to talk today with Laurel Sprigg, singer and former small business owner. For 30 years, Laurel ran her business, Laurel Sprigg, Inc., providing couture-quality sewing of soft furnishings for the designed interior, custom-made draperies, shades, bed covers, pillows, and more. Her work has been featured in Architectural Digest and California Homes magazines. Since retiring earlier this year from her business, she's been focusing on putting more time into her ampersand, singing and performing as a soprano. She currently sings with the SF Choral Society and has performed opera, art song, and choral works with numerous organizations around the Bay Area. Laurel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for having me. It's really an honor to be with you today. Thanks.
Laurel, I was really interested to learn that performance has always been a part of your life. You had mentioned your mother was a professional violinist, and you studied piano as a kid and cello and voice as a college student, all while majoring in dance. What was it like growing up in your household with the arts all around you?
There was just music always, for sure. And I remember Mom taking me to ballet performances when I was young. I got to see Margot Fonteyn dance. I mean, that was just it for me. It was like, okay, I want to do that. So I took a lot of ballet and then later modern dance. It was wonderful. My mom, she was religious about practicing the violin. She did it every day, no matter what was going on in her life. And my parents divorced when I was 3, so she was a single mom essentially and working full time and also playing in orchestras and string quartets. And she would always practice every day. And I just remember that as being a normal part of life. And about once a month, she would get together with her closest friends and play chamber music. They would play quartets, and all of the kids belonging to all these people would be running around where there would be a potluck. And the kids would be playing, and the parents would just be, working on a quartet and then stopping in the middle of things and talking about it. And, oh, let's try it this way. And now in that phrase, let's do this and let's do that again. And so there was this conversation about music that I just thought was wonderful. And of course, as kids, we didn't pay too much attention to what they were doing. It was just there. And I grew up sort of thinking that everybody knew about that. But I was surprised to find that that wasn't the case.
When did you find that out?
I would say I became more aware of that in high school. I would talk about things that were like normal for me, and other kids in high school were kind of like, huh? What are you talking about? I had a small group of friends that knew about the arts and were interested in the arts, but I was also raised Unitarian Universalist, and my UU youth group was also sort of my haven, and that youth group became my social place rather than high school.
And I know you're still involved with the Unitarian Universalist Church today. Tell me more about that.
I'm a member at the one here in San Francisco, First Unitarian Universalist Society, and we have a wonderful choir and a terrific music director, Mark Sumner, for the UC Berkeley Alumni Chorus and several UC choruses, teaching and doing music all around the Bay Area. So he's very busy and connected and brings wonderful selections for us to work on and encourages me to sing solos for the church services if I like, which I do like. So I get a chance to sing a little bit there. And then when I visit my sister up in Port Townsend, Washington, I offer singing there, and they usually let me sing at her church too, also UU. And then a friend of mine through all of that, Mark Johnson, who I knew from the Unitarian Choir and also the design business, he's now got a job playing in Port Angeles. And when I was up visiting my sister, he said, "You wouldn't want to come sing for the Lutheran church?" I said, "Sure." So the actual church doesn't matter so much to me, but I love just being able to sing. And I've sung in a few other churches here in San Francisco, too.
Wonderful. So you grew up as a pianist and then a cellist and a singer. And I'm curious to know more how that evolved into dance. How did all these arts influence each other?
I would say it was kind of all a package thing, When I was a kid, I mentioned my mom, was a single mom. I'd come home from school, and I remember from a pretty early age, like 6 and 7, I'd walk home with the neighbor girls, and they'd go to their mom's house. And their mom was sort of looking out for me, but I was next door, and I would just go home and play. But I would turn on music. I would put on records, and I would sing and dance to South Pacific and to My Fair Lady and all these wonderful musicals that my mom had recordings of. And I would also watch television, and I loved watching Fred and Ginger, and I would sing along with them too. So that was like, oh yes, this is what I want to do. So that's why I actually chose dance as a major for college. That was a natural for me.
It feels like you were surrounded by all these arts. So how did you transition into textiles and interior design and sewing?
Well, I've always been doing that too. So as a kid, I remember playing with my dolls a lot, and I would upend furniture like chairs and drape them with my mother's scarves and jewelry and create palaces for my dolls. When I did try to play with other kids, they were like, oh, let's all go to the grocery store. And it's like, no, let's create a palace. And I remember climbing the tree in the front yard and taking yarn and making ladders between platforms and creating tree houses for them. So architecture was kind of in my brain, and the idea of creating sets, because I watched all these wonderful movies too, and they had all these wonderful sets and costumes. I remember at an early age making doll clothes too. As soon as I could learn how to wield a needle and thread, I started making doll clothes and designing them too. So that's always been part of my life. And then later on, we didn't have a lot of money. My parents made it very clear, my mom, when she remarried, that if I wanted more than the annual school outfit, I'd have to work and do it myself. So I worked, but I also figured out that if I made my own clothes, I could stretch those dollars farther. So I would go to the dollar section of the fabric store and get $1 a yard fabric. I was probably one of those hippies in high school that everybody was like, what is she wearing today? I don't know. But I remember looking at fashion magazines and looking at what they were putting out, and I would get cheap muslin and I would paint it with Rit dye and make my approximation of things. It was a lot of fun. So textiles and sewing has always been part of my life too.
So you started your business in 1991, and you were a woman, a mom of a young child. What was it like to do that?
It was kind of scary, actually. I wanted to do some sort of work where I could stay home with my son when he was young. I thought I may only have one child, which in fact I only have one child. I didn't want to miss anything. I didn't want to miss the first steps, the first words, all of that growth and delight, of a young child. So I thought, well, what else can I do? I didn't want to go back to corporate life. And the whole banking industry was pretty much tanking at that point anyway, and I was not interested in banking anyhow. I mean, I did my best at it, and I achieved a certain level of success there, but I cashed in my stock options and stayed home for 5 years with my son. And then I started looking for places to sew, and I thought, well, I like to sew. Let's see what I can do. And it was trial and error, really. I put cards at fabric stores and discovered that people who frequent fabric stores are looking for the cheapest possible way to do something. It wasn't worth my while. People would say, well, I can buy a jacket at Marshall's for, so many dollars. Why can't you sew it for that? And it's like, lots of reasons. So I thought, okay, custom is a better way to go. So I did do some custom coat making and wedding dresses. It's also very difficult because it's so fraught emotionally. I love having the huge volume of fabric working on a wedding gown, but I cannot stand the high drama of all the bridal emotions. I really think drama belongs on the stage and not in your work environment. Then I discovered the interiors, and I thought, well, let's try this. I saw an ad in a window, a shop window, for somebody who could sew. So I applied, and turns out that's what they did. They would just hand me stuff and some instructions and let me do it. And it's like, okay. But that led me into discovering the whole design business, which is a huge business of its own. And I was totally unaware of it before. I discovered the design center, where there are lots of showrooms who show these products to the designer clients. Designers and architects shop there for their customers. And showrooms have to show what their fabrics can do, so I offered to create samples for them. They had furniture that needed bed covers and pillows and things like that. They provided the fabric, I provided the labor for free, and made lots of display samples. Because when somebody's shopping there, they'll look at a display and say, "Oh, who made that?" And I got a lot of referrals that way. The other thing I did is I took my cards to the people who worked in the showroom, and they said, "Oh, we'll put them out." I said, "Don't." I said, "Keep them behind the desk, and when you're talking to a designer or a client you really like working with, who treats you well and who is a nice person, give them my card."
When I went to your website, and when I read the description of your sewing business, I have these adjectives come to my mind: luscious, rich, soft. And it so happens that all these adjectives I would use to describe the timbre of your voice.
Thank you.
How do you think textiles and sewing have influenced your singing?
Well, I think I understand the idea of texture in terms of textiles and in terms of music, and that something about creating an interior for someone with cloth. And I was not the interior designer on the job. I was merely providing the soft furnishings, but I got to see a lot of top flight interior designers working and to see how they put things together and what they did. And to me, that is creating a set for someone's life. And so a person feels really comfortable and can be themselves and be relaxed in their own space. And that kind of warm welcome is something that I think it's really important in performing. That in performing, you want to welcome the audience in and invite them into your ideas, invite them into your artistry, if you will, and then take them on a journey. If you start there, you can take them to the deepest, darkest place, but you can't leave them there. And you bring them back to some place more comfortable and light and end the concert on a more upbeat note. Because you don't want to send everybody home being horribly depressed. That's not what performers are supposed to do, in my opinion. You can move people to tears. Like I'm working on the Verdi Requiem right now, which I think is the most marvelous piece of music, and I'm just singing in the chorus. Although I'm getting to practice the solo parts in the rehearsals, which is great fun as just a rehearsal soloist. But you always leave with Lux Aeterna. That's the ending of that piece. It's like he takes his audience from this very gentle first movement and a lot of exultant movements, like the Sanctus. But you've got the Dies Irae running through it. It's like the wrath of God. I mean, it's just this heavy music that's terrifying. But he leaves it on this heavenly moment of the Lux Aeterna. It's art. It's what art is supposed to do.
That music clip was Laurel Sprigg singing Des Dichters Abendgang, the Poet's Evening Walk, by Richard Strauss, with Paul Dabb on piano. Let's pause here a moment so you can reflect on this question. When was the last time you were moved by art? Outside of hosting this podcast, I coach leaders in the workplace to navigate change, thrive in their roles, and stay true to their values. And I love working with ampersands. If any of this intrigues you, reach out to me at jessicawan.com. JESSICAWAN. Now, back to the show. It also strikes me that a lot of what you've been bringing up around working with interiors and working with audiences, it has to do with that connection. When the connection's there, then that is something to be nurtured. And if the connection's not there, then it might be okay to leave.
And it might be okay just not to do it if it doesn't feel connected to you. When I perform, it's really important to me to connect to the audience. When I was dancing, that was in the 70s, and there was a kind of aesthetic going on at the time of like you could do something really cerebral and the audience just had to tolerate it. I think of Merce Cunningham, who I adored, but the John Cage music with it, with the Cunningham, and they didn't work together at all. They were independent entities on purpose. And, some of that music felt like an assault to me. I can respect them, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to assault the audience. I want to engage the audience and have people connect and feel moved emotionally.
So you've been performing your whole life. You spent 30 years running a business. You've raised a child. What fueled you to keep going and to keep straddling these at least two worlds?
Well, in one sense, I had to make a living. I mean, that was just bottom line. I had to make a living. And, if you have a job, you can leave the job and take another job. But once you have your own business rolling, it's pretty hard to set it down. In that 30 years, I really didn't take ever more than 2 weeks off. If there was work to be done on the weekends, I did it because I don't believe in making my employees do overtime. The other thing, though, is just my own soul and spirit. I needed art. I needed to do more than just make things that other people ordered. And I love sewing and I love the design business, but I was not the designer in charge of the project. I was just one of the team that the designer brought in. I needed something that fed my own soul too, and that's music. And that's always why I've gone to music, because there's just things you can express musically that I can't any other way.
I love that. What advice do you have for people who are pursuing or thinking of pursuing the ampersand lifestyle?
I would say follow your heart. Find the things you love to do. I always think of it as a garden. If you just do your work of doing what you love and share that with people, that will grow into something else. The way I grew my business and the way I'm looking at singing too is that if you're supportive of your colleagues, if you're helpful when other people need help, if you offer your services and for nothing at the beginning, then people respond to that and offer you the next thing, or the next step comes out of that. You never know who you're going to meet or what's going to happen with the people that you're encountering. And I just think it's important to be kind and generous to everyone as much as humanly possible. And as we discussed, in some cases, having boundaries about that, but always being kind about it anyway. The people I did turn away in the design business said, I'm so sorry I'm not able to take your project. Good luck. It's okay to say that. But I think so often people think of business as being cutthroat and the arts as being competitive, and which they are sometimes, and certainly many other businesses, that's true. But it doesn't have to be that way. And it doesn't have to be that way in the arts. I think in the arts, if we are supportive of one another and freely sharing what we are able to do, then that will grow. It's like a garden. You just tend it with kindness and it will flourish.
So you retired earlier this year. How has retirement been?
I'm adjusting. I turned 70, actually, that was last May. And so at the end of last June, my lease was up at the design center where I had been for about 12 years. And after COVID, frankly, I was working harder than ever. I know that's sort of not what most people experienced. During COVID, a lot of people were stuck at home. And so therefore wanting to renovate and remodel and make new everything. And there is a certain strata of wealthy people out there who have multiple homes who were doing it in all of their homes. So I was working harder than ever, but my staff was not able to be in the shop for a while there, and then only a few people came back. So I was having to do an awful lot more work than I ever had, even though I was at a point where I wanted to slow down. And I just thought, it's costing me a lot to do this. It's taking a tremendous amount of energy. 30 years, time to stop, because I want to sing. I wanted more opportunities to sing and more time to do music and to exercise more, because I felt like I never gave myself enough time to do what I needed to do just to keep my health. So I thought it's just time for me to pay more attention. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been taking warm water exercise classes, which I love, because being in a warm pool, and I've been walking more and resting, taking time to read a book, studying music as long as I feel like it, getting up in the morning and reading the paper and doing the crossword puzzle over a cup of tea. It's just like, it's a great relief.
So as you know, one of the goals of this podcast is to get a bunch of ampersands together and do interviews and collectively come up with what I'm calling the Ampersand Manifesto. So Laurel, what do you think should be in this manifesto?
I think lifelong curiosity and learning is an important part of that. Interest in the world, interest in other people, interest in life and being open to learning about life. It's sort of a lifelong learner is what keeps going on in my head. And what they call in Buddhism, beginner's mind, that you're willing to be open and to say that you don't know something. And it's interesting because when you've done something for 30 years, you think, well, you're pretty good at it. You ought to know a lot by then. And I do, but even so, like with singing, for example, you can never know it all. It's impossible. There's always something new to learn. And so I'm always learning, always growing. I keep going back to my voice teacher. I keep taking classes at the Conservatory of Music because there's always something I don't know yet, and I want to know. So I think that kind of being willing to know a lot but not know enough and still be open and say, well, I don't know about that. Because some people in some businesses get to a point, well, I'm the authority and I know, and you're wrong. It's like, that doesn't compute to me. It's like, what's the point of that? Doesn't help anybody. And I don't ever want to be like that. It's a frame of mind.
Laurel, it's been such a pleasure talking with you today. Folks, you can check out Laurel's work at laurelsprigg.com and laurelspriggsoprano.com. Her name is spelled Laurelsprigg. If you liked this podcast, hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends and fellow ampersands. I had a chance to reflect on my interview with Laurel and wanted to share a few key takeaways. 1. I loved how Laurel talked about her childhood, where music was all around her. It makes me wonder, how can we as a society continue to normalize the arts in childhood? When you have a parent who's an artist or an ampersand, how does that shape you? And how can we support more parents to be ampersands? If you're a parent, you get a lot of advice about parenting. But there is so much also in modeling the life that you want for your kids in what you take on yourself, whether that's the arts, fitness, writing, or something else. 2, I admire Laurel's approach to building a client base where she was thoughtful about who she worked with from the very beginning. As a small business owner, it can be tempting to say yes to any opportunity. But from an early stage, Laurel was clear about who she wanted in her business ecosystem, and over time, those seeds she planted grew into her garden. 3, something Laurel shared with me that didn't quite make it into the interview is the teaching side of her story. Along with being a lifelong learner, for years she taught textiles classes at UC Berkeley Extension and hosted interior design talks for colleges all over the Bay Area. Students often later became her clients, and it also built goodwill in the design community. Laurel talked about beginner's mind, which can be cultivated both through learning as well as teaching.
To me, learning is a lifelong thing. I don't ever plan to stop. There are so many interesting things to learn and do. When people say they're bored, I don't understand that at all. It's like there's so much to learn and do in the world. There just isn't enough time to do it all in one lifetime, let alone, 6 or 7 or 8. I mean, there's just so much out there. So I'm not stopping until I drop. That's just, part of who I am.